Have you ever said something creepy as a kid that scared your parents? I had an imaginary friend when I was something around 2 to 3 years old. His name was Omar. There was this locked window in our former home that not even my mom and dad were able to open, like it was stuck or something. One day my mom was in the bathroom, near the room where this locked window was, and she started to hear me whisper stuff to Omar, stuff like, "Yeah, I know we can open that together, and okay, let's try." Then she heard me say, push it. Push it. For a bit, followed by a happy, yay. My mom got worried and decided to get out of the bathroom to find the window wide open and smell me, probably enjoying the nice view with my imaginary friend, who helped a 2-year-old girl open a window not even a full grown-up man could. Not me but my older sister. She was close to turning 4 and was learning how to form sentences. My dad and mom were in the living room and she picked her up and was baby talking her. My dad noticed she wasn't in a playful mood, she was quiet and sometimes frightened. Since this wasn't her usual behavior, he asked, "What's wrong, sweetie?" They said that she then looked over her shoulder and started pointing at an empty corner on the ceiling, and whatever she was seeing, she would point at it as if it were moving from corner to corner in the air. She started crying, but then she stopped abruptly out of nowhere. She turned serious and stared at the wall, and my parents heard my baby sister, in a clear-as-day voice, say, "Get out, this isn't your house, it's mine." My parents got scared and left to a friend's house. My sis is 28 now and says she doesn't remember what weird entity she saw in that weird little house. Last weekend I was at my uncle's farm. The first day I got there, I found a baby barn swallow with a big birthmark on its beak. It couldn't fly, so I picked it up, and during the process of teaching it how to fly, I named it Mohawk, or Mo for short. The next day, I was babysitting my 4-year-old cousin. I was trying to put her down for a nap, but she was just throwing a fit saying he's swimming, but he can't, over and over again. I finally asked her what she means and she stops crying, looks me right in the eye, and said it's too late, Mo is sleeping on the Ferris wheel. After this statement, she was able to fall asleep, so I started walking to the chicken coop, not thinking anything of her freak out. But as I was walking, I noticed a fountain my uncle has in his yard. It has a water wheel with lights on. To a small child, it looks like a Ferris wheel. I immediately thought of what my cousin had said about Mo sleeping on the Ferris wheel. I looked in the little pond and there he was floating. I could tell it was him because of the birthmark on his beak. I was freaked out. I went and told my uncle so he could get it out and also let him know what his kid had said, and he straight up said, "Get used to it. She does it all the time." Like, I'm sorry but WTF, that's weird and creepy as heck. When I was 4, I climbed the fence to look into my neighbor's garden and I saw a girl sitting at this garden table with 4 sweets. She turned to look at me and it was like she had a black and white filter over her. She was wearing all white and had black hair, and instead of a face, she had a deep pitted spiral the whole way through her head that got narrower as it reached the back, so it was so wide, it took up her whole head at the front, but at the back, it was just a tiny hole. The next day, I climbed the fence again, and my neighbor and her 2 daughters were sitting around the table. The seat where the spiraled face girl was sitting was empty. I asked my neighbor, "Where did the girl with the spiral face go?" and pointed to the empty seat. My neighbor got up, crying, and went into the house. I found out years later that my neighbor used to have 3 daughters. The oldest, who was 19 at the time of her death, was ended in a paramilitary attack, and that nobody had sat in her seat at the garden table since she passed. Given this information, I figured the spiral was actually the entry and exit wound of the bullet. Freaked my mum out a heck of a lot. I have a son who is about to be 8. Lately he's been getting in trouble at school for crying because he misses me, which is something that we dealt with before when he was around 5. He had seemed to grow out of it within a few weeks, and now for some reason, it's resurfacing. But anyway, I was driving home with him one afternoon after school, and he told me he had had a yellow day, a day where he had gotten in trouble a few times at school. I asked him why he got in trouble. He told me it was because he was crying a lot and didn't pay attention to the teacher. I asked him why he was crying, and he said he missed me and that he was worried about me. I asked him why he was worried, and he immediately clammed up and big tears started rolling down his cheeks. I asked him again, he didn't want to tell me. Eventually later on that night, we were sitting on the couch together and I asked him why he was so upset today. He started crying again and looked at his feet. I said, "Tell me what is going on in your head, bub," and he looked up at me and whispered, "I don't want you to die." My heart sank, and I asked him why he was thinking about that sort of thing. Like I said, he's only just about to be 8, there's no reason he should be thinking about death. He isn't allowed to watch scary movies. He does play video games, but we're talking Lego Batman, and very occasionally, we play Halo together, but he is prone to nightmares, so we limit his exposure to that sort of stuff. He wouldn't say anything else about it though, he just clung to me tightly and cried for a few more minutes before he got sucked into the movie we were watching. I didn't sleep well that night though. Later that night, I was half asleep laying in the darkness of my bedroom, and I got that eerie feeling that I was being watched. I'm used to that feeling by now, my kids constantly creep into my room at night, so I opened my eyes, and there he was, just staring at me, inches away from my face. Irritated, I told him to go back to bed. He said something on his way out. I didn't quite hear it, so I said, "What?" He stops and looks at me, deadpan, and says, "I was just checking to see if you were breathing." Not as good, but before I could speak, I had an imaginary friend. My parents said I'd pick the same corner of the room, sit myself down and babble at the wall. Doesn't sound that weird to me, but they insist I repeated key words and spoke in complete sentences, pausing like I was having a conversation, but only when I was sitting in that spot and not to other people. Except one night, when my mom found me standing upright in my crib, talking to a shadow on my wall that disappeared when she entered the room. The night after, I either tried to escape or was tugged out of my crib because she found me dangling. One leg got stuck in a side rail on the way down. I started talking for real not long after that, and the behavior stopped. Mom calls it my guardian angel, I call it creepy. I never did anything, but my brothers used to scare the crap out of me for years. Up until a year or two ago, both my brothers suffer from night terrors and would often sleepwalk during them. Basically, they could see everything normal, but would still be able to see their nightmare happening while awake, and most nights, it'd be like 3 or 4 a.m. when one of them woke, and at least half of the time, they'd walk into my room having full-blown meltdowns, pointing at me and screaming, "Get off my sister," or "Stop, you're scaring her," but they'd be too afraid to even come into my room. I was never allowed to tell them about it when they woke up again properly for some reason by my parents. Another time is when I swapped rooms with my youngest brother, he was 9 at the time. He literally turned around and said to not stare at the little girl in the bedroom window, and ever since then, my curtains have been closed at the slightest sign that it is getting dark. I was 10 years old when this happened. I was helping my young cousin make her bubble bath when something grabbed me and pulled my head into the water. My other cousin heard me banging on the bathtub and pulled me out. We both looked at the young cousin and asked, "Why didn't you help me?" And she said, "The man standing next to you said not to." I have never been so scared of a child that's not in a horror film. Apparently, as a little kid, I came into my parents' room in the middle of the night and woke up my dad to tell him I had seen an old man in my room. The next day, my mum told me that I should always wake her up instead because my dad had to work in the morning. Apparently I said something like, "I would have come to you, but the old man was standing next to you." Spooked her pretty good. I was a sleepwalker as a kid, and it always freaked my dad out. He said I would come out of my room and stare at him until he talked to me. Then I would hold an entire conversation with him that he said made sense, but it was like he was talking to a stranger or like there was someone other than me looking out at him. This went on from toddler age to junior high. He also said when I was very young, like under 5, he would drive with me through our cow herd, and I would tell him which cows would give birth soon. Apparently I was never wrong. He was equal parts amazed and creeped out. I don't even remember doing that. Also, when my older brother was a small child, he once asked Dad why the lady in the old blue dress came into his room every night and talked to him. Dad wasn't much of a paranormal believer, but he said that made his hair stand on end. When my daughter was 3, she started to cry while playing in her room. This wasn't just normal crying, it was gut-wrenching, deep sadness wailing. I found her on her bed, surrounded by her toys, just sitting there, crying. When I asked her what was the matter, she replied, "I miss my mommy." I told her that I'm right here and I'm okay, to which she replied, "No, my other mommy." Mind you, she was not adopted, and she has always been a very happy, bright and very verbal child. After trying to calm her down and telling her that I am her mommy, she insists that it is her other mommy that she is missing. She goes on to tell me, in answer to my questions, that her mommy had died and that she and her brothers, she had names, which I can't recall, and daddy all had to move away after her mom died. She was telling me this all the while sobbing. It was heartbreaking and frightening, and I'm afraid I didn't handle it well. I just kept telling her it was just a bad dream and that I'm her only mommy. For a few years, she would bring it up every once in a while, and it always bothered me, so she stopped bringing it up. I wish I had handled it better, as now she has no memory of any of it. I think it scared me to think that perhaps she was not just my baby, but belonged to another mother in a previous life, and I didn't like the idea of that. Growing up, my family and I lived in a house that was said to be built on what used to be very active Native American land in the Midwest. One afternoon, my mom was taking a nap with my then 3-year-old sister, who, out of nowhere, woke up from her nap saying, "Mommy, tell the little girl to stop playing with my toys." My mom was freaked out to say the least, especially since this was within the first week we moved there. So many creepy things happened in the 6 years we lived there, and it seemed to calm down the final year we were there after my dad had passed. My mom saw the little girl sitting at my sister's toy vanity brushing her long hair. Creepy stuff for sure. I know not the same, but my kids have said some creepy stuff that freaked me out. When my oldest was 4 or 5, he told my sister that he was going to shave off all his skin and change his name to Alan. Very creepy, but that was the only thing he ever said that was weird. The worst was my youngest. When he was between 2 and 3, we were living with my grandparents until I could get back on my feet. He slept with me in my dad's childhood bedroom. One day we were just chilling in the living room and out of nowhere, he asks me, "Do ghosts have eyes?" I tried to change the subject by saying ghosts aren't real, but he kept on with the same question. I finally said, "Why are you asking?" He said, "A man comes in my room at night and looks at me with his eyes." I was terrified.